Welcome to the Mason Duchatschek Show. And before we jump in this episode, it's brought to you by workforcealchemy.com, a place where business owners and executives go to uncover profit leaks hidden in your everyday operations. Jimmy Burroughes is a former military leader who has taken lessons from high stakes, high pressure environments and applied them inside some of the world's most recognized organizations, including Samsung, Lego, and Bank of America. Known for his simplified Amplify approach, he helps leaders cut through complexity, improve performance, and reduce burnout. His work has driven measurable results at scale, and today he advises executives on how to lead with clarity in environments that demand both speed and precision. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
In your military experience, when everything is high stakes and fast moving, how do you decide what actually matters most?
It's such a deep question because the flippant answer is it depends. The more considered answer is we've got to look at value and impact as our two, measures of where to start. And I think often what happens is we react to the thing that's the most urgent or the biggest fire that's sitting in front of us. Whereas actually from the work that we do with leaders, it's around how do I choose what's the most important thing to work on? The thing that's really going to move the dial or the thing that's going to shift the business in the most meaningful way. And if we can combine that with finding the easiest, highest impact thing, then we kind of hit this sweet spot of where activity goes. And, if I think about this from a military perspective or a commercial perspective, we're always asking people to say, what's the lowest effort, highest impact activity you could do out of all of the things you've got to do? That's how you can find what matters most.
It's funny. You're reminding me of a conversation I had, and I was just a brand new second lieutenant. So we're talking a long, long time ago. But Colonel Calvin Broughton, he was in the Missouri Army National Guard, and he pulled me aside one day and told me something I've never forgotten. He drew a little matrix. He drew 4 boxes. He said, Mason, there's 2 ways to do things. There's the right way to do things, and there's the wrong way to do things. He says, there's also the hard way and the easy way. And he literally challenged us to think in terms of, first of all, what's the right way to accomplish this thing? And what's the wrong? The easy and right box is the one he said you want to focus on. And it's always stuck with me. But anyway, I digress. When you moved into working with large organizations, what surprised you most about how leaders handle complexity?
I think probably the thing that surprised me the most was people don't have a system for dealing with complexity. Most leaders, by virtue of the workload that they have and the way that leadership training has been developed over the last 25 or so years, haven't been given a system for complexity. And you add to that the fact that complexity is significantly up compared to a generation ago. What surprises me is we haven't developed better ways of navigating that and helping leaders to think through the problems that are in front of them and be less reactive. I think nearly every leader I talk to now is firefighting whilst whacking moles, whilst juggling a million balls, whilst putting out lots of fires. And so there's very little time for them to go, what is the right thing to be doing right now? And why is this so complex? And how can I make it less complex? So maybe it's just complicated. And how do I resource and plan my response here most effectively?
So can you give me an example of what a systematic approach to solving those kind of issues might look like?
Well, like we just spoke about too, having a way of saying, well, what is the lowest effort, highest impact activity I could do here, and having a little grid that I could put stuff on. What's the right, easy way of approaching this? The majority of leaders that we see will have a list of stuff they've got to get done, and they start at the top of the list and they work their way down and they hope they get through everything on a daily basis. That's not a system. That's just, it is a system. It's not a very effective system for when you're working in a complex environment. They also don't have a system for thinking about the purpose or the why we're doing certain things, and does that contribute more meaningfully to the business or not? And they don't also have a system for defining, is this the work for me to be doing, or is this for somebody in my team to be doing? And often leaders carry on doing things they shouldn't be doing, or take over things they shouldn't take over. because they just believe in the system they're operating, and they believe that they are ultimately responsible, therefore they have to do it. They haven't got the system of going, in this complex environment, my job is to marshal resources. My job is to find the experts, and my job is to make decisions and to make sure things happen, not necessarily to do them myself.
That's a very, very good instinct. It's funny because you talked about people having their list. Because I mean, I've been guilty in the past, and fortunately, I've been surrounded by good mentors, and even little designations like being able to identify what's important versus what's important and urgent. Because there's a lot of important things. You can have that, like you talked about earlier. Someone can have a whole list of all these things they need to do that are all important. But if they can't prioritize and say, well, which ones are urgent? Which ones are time sensitive? Which ones are going to cause consequences if they're not addressed sooner rather than later? It lets me move those up on the priority list. Or if I don't address some of these issues early, then I'm clogging the system downstream. And just little distinctions like that for a lot of people can make a big difference. I just know that one in particular was a big difference for me early in my career. So it's those folks that do have the list and go through it. Yeah, they can get through it, but if they're wanting to be super high speed, that's a different level of intention as far as what to
Absolutely.
go in that list.
I
So
think the
how
other
do
one
you?
that we don't have, we struggle for is the idea of sequencing. And in the military, it's called concurrent activity, but basically setting something off so it can be baking in the oven while you're preparing something else. Often, I think when we're in complex environments, we don't have the ability to and the headspace to say, actually, this is something we should get going now. So we can work on this later and we get a product at the end. Or actually, this is better to leave for a little bit so we can work on this and focus here, and then we'll start that later. Like that sequencing is a really core skill of leadership that, again, is not taught by many people, and means that there's a gap in capability for a lot of leaders.
It's well, you're triggering a bunch of things and I haven't thought of in a long time. I was a combat engineer. And one of the things they taught us about, and I have not, these words have not come out of my mouth in probably 30 years, but critical path method, where we
Hmm.
did exactly what you're talking about. Like, what is the path from where we are now to what our end product's going to look like? What steps can be arranged in a way where we can organize our labor and our resources to get as much done in the time that we can. So what, like you said, maybe while, let's say in my case, concrete was curing, there are other things that we could be doing, but we had to make sure that we would do that to early in the process to give that time to cure so we could work on other things while that. So it was really about maximizing resources. And I was in my early 20s when I first got exposed to that. And there's a lot of people that have never been exposed to something that strategic, for lack of a better word. So how do you know when a business problem is actually a complexity problem in disguise?
The world that we work in is less about leadership development and is more about business performance. And the analogy I use for when I'm trying to explain it to leaders is it's kind of like you've got you and your leadership team in a rowboat, and you're all rowing as hard as you can, and you're getting tired because you're rowing so hard. And the challenge we've got is that everybody's facing in different directions, rowing in different directions. Everybody's rowing out of time. The boat's sitting in treacle, and there's a rope attached to the dog. And so we've got this enormous amount of what I would call systemic friction getting in the way of you being successful. This is the complexity thing is one of the systemic frictions. And so I think most business problems are we've got to identify what's the friction point here that is getting in the way of us performing. And oftentimes it's because either we haven't fully understood the problem, we haven't understood the why, we haven't understood the purpose, we haven't understood the system, and we haven't understood what's going on. And so it looks really complex. Equally, it can be because we're rushing, we haven't understood the complexity of it. So we're underestimating it. So we're either over or underestimating complexity, and we're sitting in this rowing boat, which is rowing in treacle, full of friction. So our system doesn't work properly, even if we attack it head on. That's where I kind of sit with this. I think the business problem, I mean, there are other business problems, obviously, with people and other stuff. But from this perspective, where I saw this question taking us was trying to encourage leaders to say, well, if this is a business problem, what are we not seeing? What's really going on here? How do we boil this down to something to get to the facts? How do we understand what problem we're actually trying to solve is? I had a great conversation yesterday with a group of OD leaders, organizational development leaders. And the first question that every time was asked in this conversation was, well, what's the business problem you're actually trying to solve? What's the thing you're struggling with here? Because people were getting into these really complex solutions before they were even understanding what the problem was, because they felt they had to create something really elegant and complex. And I think that causes the problem. So it's that kind of overestimation or underestimation of complexity can often exacerbate the business problem.
So, what are the biggest mistakes leaders make when they try to improve performance by adding more instead of simplifying?
Let me ask you a question. If you don't sleep very well and you go to work tired, and when you get to work, there's three people standing by your desk, and they all asking you questions at the same time, and your phone's ringing, and your wife and you had an argument with your wife just before you left the house, or your partner just before you left the house, uh, and then the CEO comes in and says, "I need to talk to you right now." And as you're walking down the corridor, the CFO says, "Oh, we've got a problem with the budget." How are you going to be feeling? You're going to be on the back foot, right? You're going to be what we call a fight or flight response, and which takes your brain from being in its wizard mode, its super intelligent executive mode, into a lizard mode, which is a reptilian response. It's part of the amygdala at the back of the brain that does fight or flight or flee. And the problem is that when we add more, we just exacerbate that response. So we go from being a wizard to a lizard, and then we become even more lizardish when we add more things on top. And what we need to do is to slow down, create some capacity. So we have methodologies that we teach the people we work with that create space to think and reflect and work on the important stuff, which creates hopefully more space. So they're doing less and working on the important things. I think often when we think about high performance, we just say, let's just turn everything up to 11 and it'll be great. Let's add bigger goals and more ambitious targets and push people harder. Well, if your system is so full of friction that rowing the boat harder is not going to go any faster, then you've got to look at why are we in treacle and what can we do to sort that out? And so the only way you can do that is to stop and look around and think. And in the military, we call it the condor moment, where you sit down, you make a cup of tea and you go, well, what's going on in this battle? The same thing applies in business. You can't just go, let's just attack more and hope we win. What if you're attacking the wrong thing? What if you're going in the wrong direction? What if you're doing the wrong thing entirely? You've got to look at that.
So can you maybe walk us through a real example where simplifying something led to measurable jump in performance for an organization that you've worked with?
Actually, my second book was a case study essentially of this. It's called Escape the Multitasking Trap. And I worked with a CEO and his leadership team for about a year and a half on a variety of projects. But the first one was actually working with the CEO directly, and he was Mr. Multitasking. He was the master of multitasking in his mind, and he could carry 20 things in his head at the same time. And he would always be setting projects off and dipping his fingers in here, there, and everywhere to try and make sure that everything was running effectively. And when I started talking to his leadership team, what I discovered was that they didn't know if they were Arthur or Martha. Is he working on this today or is he working on that today? Where's the focus today? Where's the priority today? He keeps changing his mind. Or it feels like to me like he keeps changing his mind. We're uncertain of what success looks like because it keeps moving and we keep changing direction. We've just got too many things on and I can't actually get anything done because we keep starting new things. And so I had this conversation with the CEO and I said, well, let's try a new phenomenon, which is called monotasking. In the old days, it was called doing one thing at a time. And let's see how that goes. So let's focus on one project per week with the leadership team. Let's marshal all our resources to fulfill that project. People who aren't involved in that project get a week of reflection and building their own business out. But as a leadership team, we're going to crack one thing a week, not 17 things a week, just one. And let's see what happens. Over the course of the next 6 months, we did this as part of their regular cadence. Obviously, I had to take a little bit of time to adjust into it, but we got this as part of their regular cadence. We then did some follow-up interviews, and to 100% of the exec said, the first thing that's happened is I'm achieving more in my own business unit because I'm not so overloaded with stuff for the CEO. Second one is we as a leadership team have achieved more than in the last 6 months than we have ever achieved because we actually got stuff done versus things getting in the way of each other. We had to stop and think, what is the next most important thing to do this week versus just trying to tackle all of them. Cortisol levels were down. We did blood tests on people. Cortisol levels were down. Absenteeism was down. People weren't getting sick as frequently because they weren't as worn out. Engagement was up. Business results were up. Profitability was up. So just a very simple thing, which is, and this is the thing I say to nearly all of our leaders, everything we teach you is really simple. Not necessarily easy, but really simple. And part of being simple is it's got to be simple. So for us, it was like, let's stop doing lots of things. Let's start doing one thing. and choose each week the most important thing for us to do.
It's what thoughts or advice do you have for people? Because most of the folks that are tuning into our show on a regular basis are business owners or CEOs and people who aspire to those roles. So for the people who aspire to those roles, who are getting things consistently dumped on them, and they're maybe at their capacity or maybe a little bit above and things are overflowing and that happens. What, if
Yep.
any, suggestions do you have to those folks on how to handle that with a CEO or business owner who keeps adding to the pile before they've, or I like to say, keeps putting more on their plate before they've chewed what's in their mouth?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And this is a really common question that comes up in our workshops is like, well, my boss just keeps adding. So what do I do? We use a couple of tools here. The first one is a framework that we teach called PVC, which for the engineers amongst you will know that's polyvinyl chloride, but for us it's purpose, value, and capacity. And it's I guess a series of decision gates that you can jump through to help you work out where you should put your time and energy. The first thing is then purpose. What's the purpose of this being done? And are we really clear on which strategic pillar that this links to? The second piece is what's the purpose of me being involved? I.e., do I have to do it or could I find somebody in my team to do it? And often what we see is that managers who are really overloaded are overloaded because they haven't learned to delegate effectively, or they don't trust anybody else to do stuff, or that they feel like it has to be them who does it. So even though the CEO is giving it to them, oftentimes, and I've had this in my own personal experience, the CEO doesn't mean for them to do it. They're saying, hey, I need you to take responsibility for this and get it done, not I need you to personally do this. So what's the purpose of this being done? Do I understand the purpose and where it links? And what's the purpose of me being involved? The second piece then is V, which is value. Value is all about what's the value of this versus that. So again, we're talking about doing the most important thing here. So value, you could look at whichever metric you choose. Let's just randomly choose revenue as a metric. If this is going to make us $10 million in revenue and that is going to make us $1 million in revenue, then I should probably put more energy into the $10 million project. Very simple example, but it kind of paints the picture. Maybe your value is in wastage or loss or absenteeism, depending on what role you're in. But looking at the value. The second piece of value is what's the value of my time? And we use a very simple equation for this. You just take your annual salary, you divide it by 2040. That gives you your rough hourly rate. And you say, could I find somebody in my team or outsourced somewhere else in the world to do this for less than my hourly rate? So let's say, for example, your hourly rate is round numbers, $50 an hour. And you're doing a job which you could pay somebody $15 an hour to do, maybe organizing the morning tea or stocking the stationery cupboard or doing the social media comments. If you're still doing those in your business, then you're not working on the more important stuff that your CEO needs you to step up and do, which I would say is the $500 an hour tasks. So working out where you're putting your time and energy by that. The last piece is the one that most people forget. And this is capacity. So yes, your CEO is just adding another thing on and adding another thing on and adding another thing on. You have a set number of hours per week. And the danger, if you don't manage those hours, is that you head down the track to burnout, which is another whole conversation. So one of the tools we teach to manage capacity is write down everything you've got going on, go to your CEO and say, let me read out all the things I've got going on. You tell me which three are important to you or the three you want to hear about. That immediately tells you what your boss thinks is important for that week. And that's where you put your energy. What you then do is you follow that up with, what am I going to stop, slow down, or swap from my current workload that allows me to just reduce the workload a little bit. So I'm going to say, look, my boss wants to hear about this, this, and this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this project until next week, next month, next quarter, to allow me to focus. And I'm going to slow down this one because it doesn't need to be delivered today. Next Wednesday is fine. And I'm going to swap this in for that because we've said, actually, we're now not going into this market, we're going into that market. So I can swap and I can change it out. But once you've understood where your boss's priorities are, then you can align on that. And then we follow up that final piece, which is what we use a framework called the 3x3x3, which is a very simple feedback framework to your boss to say, this is the 3 things I've achieved this week. This is my 3 priorities for next week. And this is 3 things I need from you to keep going. And again, that gives you and your boss the opportunity to get aligned for him to say, well, why did you do those things this week, not that thing? And why is that your priority for next week? And yeah, I can help you with those things. It allows those conversations to take place meaningfully. So then you gradually manage to reduce, you bring your workload down because your boss is more aligned with what you've actually got going on. From experience, most executives have no idea all of the things their leadership teams are involved in. They have no idea. because they're so busy themselves that they don't have time to stop and think. They've got a bunch of you reporting to them. So it's up to you to help create the clarity for your boss that they keep adding things. You go, well, hey, look, we need to manage this so it's effective. I can't do everything for you. I need to make sure we do the things that are most important.
That's excellent advice. Thank you for sharing that. I reflect on listening to Alex Hormozy not too long ago, and he was talking about people in situations like that. And he said, sometimes you have to let the little fires burn. And you make sure you watch them so they don't become big fires, but let the little fires burn. If you don't, what's that going to lead to? Like you talked about, you hinted at burnout. I mean, if your dance card is full and you're at capacity and more gets piled on, it's like, what am I going to not do in order to do this? And the question at that point is way Harmozy was describing is, what are my little fires that I can let burn for a while? And that versus someone that has a mentality like, oh, I can't let any fires burn. I mean, if you're in a high pace, high stress environment, that's a recipe for eventual burnout and disaster. I mean, that's just not sustainable. I mean, maybe in short bursts, but not as a everyday part of the culture. Like that's just not conducive to long-term anything. But
it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I agree with you. You reminded me of another story. I worked with a large American retail business, very fast-paced business. And we ran an exec program for them where we brought in a senior leader from Amazon to have a conversation with him. And he said, on a daily basis, my day starts about 4 a.m. On a daily basis, I'll get anything between 1,500 and 2,500 emails per day. And in those emails, around 200 things will be going wrong, and there'll be about 20 crises. And on a daily basis, I could probably deal with about 5 of those, maybe 3. So the secret to success at this level is to work out, where do you turn up to fight the fire yourself, and where do you send your junior firefighters? And it's just like you saw the light bulbs go on. Sometimes, as you say, you let the fires burn. Other times, that's where you send your junior firefighters to learn how to fight the bigger fires later in their career.
so how do you know when a leader's overcomplicating their strategy or communication?
Sorry, I missed that one.
But how do you know when a leader is overcomplicating their strategy or their communication?
I think there's a few ways that, from my perspective, what I look for when I'm diagnosing overcomplication generally comes up in a few with a few signs. The first one is high turnover in the business. So people keep coming into the team, not surviving very long, and leaving. Then you go and talk to the people who are still there, and they look fraught. They look strung out because they're working on so many things. But none of them can really clearly lay out what are the priorities for the team. They've just got all the things are priorities. We've got 644 priorities that we're working on at the moment. And we're trying to get them all done this quarter. The third piece is when you go a layer below that and you start talking to them, people are just doing their jobs. I just do what I'm told to do. I just turn up and do my job. They don't have any strategic line of sight between the CEO and the leadership team's objectives and what they're doing on a daily basis. They just turn up and do stuff. That, to me, says that things are overcomplicated and lack of clarity has been passed down and passed through the business, which means that people aren't then able to make good decisions, which means that they're in that rowing boat, rowing in opposite directions. They're making the best decisions they can with what they have, what they know, but that isn't taking the boat to where you want to go.
So what are the patterns that you see in leaders who consistently get high performance without creating unnecessary stress?
That's a good question. From our perspective, there's 5 sort of high performance differentiators that we see. The first one is they are able to build trust with the people around them. I think it's Simon Sinek who talked about his work with the Special Forces, where they did a trust and performance matrix. And obviously, everybody wants the high trust, high performance guy. Nobody wants the low trust, low performance guy. But he would always rather have a high trust, low performance person than a high performance, low trust person. Because when you've got essentially, it's would I trust you with my life, and would I trust you with my wife? And if I don't trust you, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to be toxic. So we need to be able to have a mechanism for understanding what trust looks like, and a mechanism for building trust as a leader. So people will go into battle with you. They'll fight alongside you, and they'll know you've got their back. So trust is the first one that we see. I won't go through all of them. I'll just do a couple. The second one is the ability to make good decisions. Decision making as a leader is basically your job. You're not expected when you get to senior leadership to be the expert anymore. You're expected to be able to bring experts together to solve problems. We use a phrase which is your to-do list should now become the who's to-do list, as in everything on your list should be allocated to somebody, or you're bringing in an expert to solve that problem with you. And so the ability to make decisions is hard. And the more complex the environment that you're operating in, the harder it is to make decisions. So one of the things we teach is people to bring in their decision-making horizon to what's the best decision I need to make right now to give me enough information to make the next decision. And I'll give you a perfect example from another retail organization we worked with, where they were looking at, do we launch product A or product B? And lots of research went into this. And they said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to do a national pilot of product A, and we're going to see. And we're going to put millions and millions and millions of dollars into it. And we'll check it out and see if product A is the right option. So our gut tells us it is, but we're not sure. And one of my team in the room said, well, why don't you just do both at the same time, but at a smaller scale? Like maybe have you got any representative test towns or representative regions that are a really good test bed for products? And they said, well, yeah, actually we've got 2 towns that we always test everything in. Cool. So let's test product A in one and product B in the other one and see which comes out on top. It's a much smaller decision. The horizon is a lot closer. The cost outlay is a lot closer, but it gives you the information to say product A is probably a better chance of winning than product B, or product B has actually got way more legs than we expected. Let's go with product B and scale that up. But it's always making the smallest decision you can to keep momentum versus waiting on the perfect information to make the big decisions.
That's good stuff. Could you share a story where a leadership team was stuck and simplifying just one thing changed everything for them?
Yes. I'll go back to the trust example again. So trust is kind of like scuba diving in my mind. I'm a scuba diving instructor and I love to get under the water and blow bubbles and look at turtles and sharks. But when you start scuba diving, you're probably going to initially begin with snorkeling, and then you learn to do a bit of basic scuba diving, get your open water license. Requires a bit of training. You can go a little bit deeper, and then you can get your advanced open water and you can go a little bit deeper, a bit more training, a bit more complexity. And then if you want to get seriously into diving, then you can go into tech diving, which is where you're mixing gases and you can go, well, I've got a couple of friends that have been to 140 plus meters. I don't know what that is in feet, like 400 feet, which is pretty deep. So it's pretty dangerous down there. And you can see things that nobody else can see, but it's the consequences of getting it wrong are much higher. And I like to use that as an analogy for trust. You're going to have some relationships that are at the snorkeling level of trust. You're going to have some relationships that are at the basic scuba level, the advanced scuba level, and some are going to be really, really down in the weeds. You need to know where those relationships are at, and you need to have a mechanism for building that trust. So if I go back to your question, one of the leadership teams that I ended up working with, they had been together a very long time. I think the youngest serving person in the team was 4 years in. So they've been working together for quite a while, but they just didn't trust each other. They were all working in different directions. They were all working in silos. They were very much a leadership team made up of functional heads versus a team of leaders working together on the business. So the leadership team meetings were very much reporting back what's going on in my bit of the world, not how are we going to run this business. They just didn't trust each other. So in public, they agreed. In private, they undermined each other, and they would make sure that their business unit delivered, but at the expense often of another business unit. So the very simple thing we did was we showed them the scuba diving model. We showed them how to start building trust with each other, and we encouraged them to start getting to know each other as people. Many of them had worked together for years, and they didn't know things about each other. They didn't know who had kids, whose kids were disabled, who was allergic to Thai food, who was a wine drinker, who loved to cook pizza at the weekends. They didn't know any of that personal stuff. But also, they saw each other as a threat because they were all thought, well, the CEO is going to go sometime soon, and I want to be the contender for it. So they were all just, it was this crazy culture of undermining. So our job was, let's get to know each other as people first. Let's start giving you some mechanisms to build trust with each other. We're not talking trust falls and stuff. We actually give people some activities they can do that actually make a difference. And then let's start talking about making decisions in public and sharing those in public with other parts of the business. So I would have the CFO go into the marketing team and talk about why the budget was set and how it works like that. I would have the GM sales come into the operations team and talk about how sales was going and what was happening there. And that started to break down the silo mechanisms to the point where, leaders and managers in operations would say, well, how can we help sales better? That started to build the trust with the teams across the teams. And then we created one very simple rule, which is we argue in this room, but when we go out, we're a unified front. And there's a very simple change as opposed to saying we agree in this room and then we go and undermine each other. We argue in this room now. We have constructive criticism, constructive conflict to weed out the issues, to surface any problems. But when we make a decision, we agree and we get on board with it. And we had this, it was a written rule that all of the leaders signed up to. And it made such a massive difference that they said, okay, I have promised now that I'm going to do this. And it took us, I don't know, 3 or 4 months to turn this corner, gradually doing these little simple things, but they stacked up. It's almost like a sort of dragnet effect. They start to stack up over time. And the culture of that business shifted so dramatically.
So if there was only one piece of advice that you could give to business owners, CEOs, or executives who are listening today, what would be the most important piece of advice you could give and why?
The one most important piece of advice, you don't need to be the expert as the CEO. If you're the boss, your job is to make the best decisions you could possibly make. And the best way to make the best decisions is to get the smartest experts in the room around you and ask them what they think and use their knowledge and skills to help you make the best decision. Failing that, if you're the one who makes all the decisions and you're the one who is trying to be the smartest person in the room all the time, actually what you do is you stifle other people wanting to share and you stifle the talent that's there behind you from shining, which means that you just end up with more on your shoulders.
One of the themes that you've talked about throughout our conversation today has been trust. And for those who are listening, what you're saying is resonating with me deeply. And I worked for a man one time who once told me, he goes, your decisions are only as sound as the facts in which they're based. And if you apply that thinking to what you just described, that, hey, I don't have to make all the decisions. I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I can have all these people around me. But it's the importance of trust. If those people can't trust that they can speak openly and share what they actually see and what they actually feel and what they actually think, then by default as a leader, you're hamstrung. I mean, you're limited in what you can do because they're not giving you information you need to be able to make solid decisions by default. Like you are creating a disadvantage for yourself. And that's why I really like what you had to say about the importance of trust. Because if my decisions are only sounds of facts on which they're based, and I have to rely on all these other people to give me the facts and the insights and whatnot, and they can't trust me that I'm going to respond in a healthy way and or helpful way and or appropriate way, then all I'm teaching them is to sugarcoat whatever information they're going to give me, exaggerate the good news, cover up or hide bad news. And if you got a whole team of people that are exaggerating good news and covering up or hiding bad news, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what kind of decisions I'm going to be making if I'm running the show.
Yeah, it's so true. And you've probably read the amazing book "Turn the Ship Around" by L. David Marquette. If I kind of boil that down into one sentence, it's if you've got one man running the ship and 143 people not using their brains, that's never going to be as good a ship as 144 people using their brains together. And so asking people to, we use the phrase, what do you suggest, is our core leadership phrase that unlocks expertise in people versus me having the answers. And we teach this on day one of nearly every program that we do. What do you suggest? As opposed to me giving you the answers. And the change, I literally closed out a program yesterday with a dairy company. And as a group, they freed up 23 and a half hours per week, of collective time just by asking that one question, just by stopping doing and asking people what they thought instead.
It's funny you say that. I had a gentleman, I have not released the podcast yet. And he used to work for Disney. And he was talking about, he helped launch their signature restaurant, Chef Mickey's. And he was talking about how they needed to, the problem they needed to figure out is how do we get 400 people through in 43 minutes or something like that? And how do we get Mickey around to see all these people? And along with your suggestion, I don't know, he might have used the words, well, what do you suggest? But the people who had the answers were the servers. They said, we've got all these little different salt and pepper and ketchup and mustard, and they're all spread out, and we have to move them all. And then he goes, but if we had them all in one little carrier, we could just lift it up and swoop it. That would save us about, X number of seconds per table and per interaction. And you multiply that up, solve the problem. But it was literally a manifestation of what you're talking about. Well, what do you suggest? And they're asking people who knew.
Yep.
I love that advice. So if people, first of all, thank you. Second of all, if people want to know more about you, your books, your consulting, the work you do, what are the best ways for them to connect, interact, learn more, or engage with you?
I would say probably 3 ways. We have a website, which is jblhighperformance.com. On there, you can find books, blogs, white papers, free resources, loads of stuff that allows you to, immerse a little bit more in what we do. You can find me on LinkedIn, which is Jimmy Burroughes, spelled like it is in the title. And the third thing I would say is we have a really cool digital platform, which is essentially a performance management system in your pocket, but it's based around AI coaching conversations and a lot of other stuff that plugs into it. But there's some really incredible intelligence to surface what's going on in your team, what's going on in your business, where should I be putting your energy and time. So if you want to find out a little bit more about how we do what we do, there's a lot of stuff in there that's live and available, and you can have a play with it. It's the cost of a cup of coffee a week, so it's super cheap. But it's designed to be available at scale for people who are interested. You can find that at Aiden Coach, AIDEN coach.io. Other than that, feel free to reach out, have a chat. I'm always here to nerd out and have conversations with anybody who's interested.
It was an absolute pleasure visiting with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I hope everyone else enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you.
Thanks, Mason.